Hello and welcome to Paper Cuts. I'm one of your hosts today, Brando Castro, and on my right we have the ultimate sex, Dan Jackman. How you doing today, Dan?
Doing pretty super duper.
All right, and on Dan's right we have Mr. Mark Mercury.
Howdy.
Yeah. All right. And on Mark's right, Anchorman, Matthew Chang. How you doing, Matt?
Brooding and, depressed.
Ah, wonderful. Wonderful for today's topic. All right. On today's episode, we're going to be highlighting the Batman. In honor of 75 years this year, we decided that this week we're going to be highlighting Batman, talking about some of our favorite stories from The Dark Knight, and saying how they mean something to us, and then talking about what we feel about Batman's future going forward and how we kind of see it. So I'm going to get the ball rolling for us guys today. And the Batman story we'll be starting with is Batman Hush. Have any of you guys read Hush?
Absolutely.
Yep. All right, Dan, Mark, not you, Chang? All right. That's all
Not
good.
one into these stories.
That's okay. In the future, you should read it. So, for those of you who don't know, any of you listeners, Batman Hush is one of the stories from 2002-2003 run. It was written by the infamous Jeff Loeb known for his run on The Long Halloween, and the art's done by the illustrious Jim Lee, known for being Jim Lee. And it's an 11-story arc. Kind of, essentially, in a nutshell, it kind of begins as Batman confronting most of his villains. They start to act a little bit amiss, or at least he believes that they're starting to act a bit amiss. And he discovers that this is more of an elaborate ploy orchestrated by a bandaged villain, who he calls Hush, whom the comic is aptly named for. Now, I read Hush around 2006, I guess, so it's like 3 years after it debuted, which is kind of like when I started getting into comics, so I was a bit of a younger lad back then, but I think it was a really good, that's why I'm explaining Hush right now, because of that experience, because even though it's not my most revered comic, not comic I hold more dearly, I hold other Batman stories a little closer to the chest now, like Year One or Dark Victory or something like that. But I feel like at least one of the greatest triumphs about Hush is that it's really accessible. It's a really good starting point, I feel, for Batman readers, or just comic readers in general, but it still has enough depth and character exploration for any sort of long-time Batman readers. So, I mean, if any of you out there haven't read anything or just starting to flirt with Batman comics, I really suggest that that's a good place to start. You really only need a layman's knowledge of the Bat universe, and the story pretty much touches on all of Batman's allies, all of Batman's enemies. It's a really, really expansive story. Now, the way Jeff writes this isn't kind of like how he writes The Long Halloween or Dark Victory or anything he's really known for. It has a really deliberate pace to it. It's kind of a weird departure from what you're used to if you're reading anything from Loeb, but I think he knows it works to his advantage here because with Jim Lee as the artist, you just really want to give that guy as much fodder to just make these amazing set pieces, which is one of the fun parts about reading this. There's a lot of really good action. And I really enjoy it because of that. It doesn't have a lot of unnecessary exposition. Not that that's a bad point for Batman. That's where I think a lot of his great stories are, but that's what makes it a little more accessible. It's really just run and gun, all this crazy, moral, not fun, but tense Batman. Not to say it isn't fun in some points. And Lee's art is like 40% of why I read that. It's just really dynamic, really fun to watch. It's just amazing action set pieces. And a really cool fight with Superman, which you really didn't get to see in the continuity back then, so it was a good time. Unless it was some sort of special story like Kingdom Come or some craziness that was on some other dimension. Now, I mean, I think it has some problems still. The villain Hush was kind of weird. He had a good mystique, but without spoiling too much, he kind of had a disappointing plot twist. And I know back in the day, there was a lot of talk about how it kind of alluded to the eventual, and I am going to spoil it, revival of Jason Todd, because his grave was empty at the end of the story. But, and that was a lot of controversy back then, but I'm pretty sure everyone's used to comic book characters being revived at this point. And the only other thing back then that I really heard about, bad comment-wise, I really didn't sympathize it, but I feel like it's worth commenting on, was there was a lot of like pseudo-feminists back then who were like commenting on like the depiction of Catwoman by Jim Lee and Talia, and how they were a little bit too bootylicious. And I was like, I don't know. I mean,
that should not ever be an issue.
Too
good looking.
I know. It should never be a problem. I mean, they're both inherently confident warrior type characters who are very comfortable with their sexual nature. So I was like, fuck them. So, but that aside, I really think it's the best part about this comic, just in a nutshell, is that I feel like disguised behind all the action and all like the tense moments is that it's a really good personal story for Bruce Wayne. As you know, a human character, we really get to see ways where he's really vulnerable in ways you're not usually privy to in other comics. He's very like the Templar, hard man, Batman, but you see him open up in different ways. He's accepting Nightwing's maturity. He's giving a chance at a relationship with Catwoman. He feels guilty about Jason Todd's death. All these things that you just don't really get to see. And he's taking Gordon's advice for the first time in a while. I mean, despite having to get shot to really accept it, but it's a nice departure from Batman's sort of stubborn nature. And it lets us really see the struggle between how close he lets the family get to him and how far he kind of pushes his family away. So just all in all, if you haven't read it yet, it's definitely worth a read, worth your time. Love to hear any opinions if you do get to read it. So, you guys have any thoughts about Hush before we move on?
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about Hush, and maybe we'll end up talking about it more, but one of the great things about all of Jeff Loeb's Batman is that at its heart it's a detective story. I think a lot of the best Batman stories are detective stories, and at its heart, Hush is a mystery.
Yeah, that's the best part about Hush. Or at least one of the best parts, because Hush as a villain is extremely mysterious right until the reveal of who he is. And it does take a fair amount of deduction for Batman, and it takes a lot of wonky turns, with, I'm not saying too much again, but Clayface and Riddler and all that jazz. And it is one of the cool parts about the story because it has that mystique to it. So yeah, I definitely agree with you, Mark.
I think one of the best things about that particular comic is that it introduces Hush. I think that having a new piece of like a villains gallery, any kind of like rogues gallery that you could possibly have, and establish someone who you think is a good foil to Batman is difficult to go and make someone brand new. So by them introducing Hush, it goes and adds just another layer, another guy for Batman to go and defeat, and he happens to be one of the more formidable people. I really like him. He's not really like any of the other villains that he's faced before, so I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, definitely did.
Not to mention, there's a pretty fucking cool scene with the Green Lantern,
Yeah,
Alan Scott Green Lantern flying through Gotham City. I think
when they were young. It's okay. That's okay. But yeah, I definitely agree, Dan. Yeah, Hush makes for a good foil, and I mean, despite my gripes with his plot twist, it's really fun to see new villains, especially in Batman's repertoire, because even though it's known for being like this great rogues gallery, you don't really get to see new additions add on to it too much in the last few years. So.
And with the plot twist, I think in a lot of ways, you mentioned Jason Todd as not being in his grave. There was a lot of kind of foreshadowing that it was going to be Jason Todd, and I think one of the reasons there was such backlash against that was because, or people were surprised by the ending, was because it wasn't Jason Todd. It was...
Yeah, it was X person.
It was person X. And so when you have...
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of the readers were disappointed because their detective work was wrong.
Yeah.
Because you are trying to be a detective as you read this story. And I think that they felt more frustration than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually kind of like the twist.
I didn't have as much pent-up frustration as other readers. I was relatively new to Batman comics at the time, so I didn't have that predisposition. But I definitely could see it now, going back in time, and if I read it now, without reading Hush, but with like my knowledge of Batman, I would definitely feel that sort of tension in the air.
Yeah.
Especially after, reading Death of a Family. It's just there. The thought is still fresh in your head, so I definitely see what you're saying, Mark. So, but yeah, I think were you gonna say something, Chad?
No,
okay.
I got nothing to add to Hush. Didn't read it.
Alright, hang tight, Anchor Man. Alright, I'm gonna pass it off to you, Dan, man. What was your story?
Alright. My personal favorite Batman story of all time at this particular moment is actually Batman The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. It's absolutely delightful. Keep this Jeff Loeb thing going on over here. this is an unofficial sequel to Batman Year One by Frank Miller. And this is actually one of the first comics that one of my friends gave me while I was in high school to just be like, hey man, I know you like comic books, take this book. So this really got me reintroduced into the whole medium of comic books for what I'm extremely, extremely grateful for. It's a 13-issue arc, and it's done absolutely wonderfully. It's one of those detective stories, and it still has remnants of all the mobsters and the different families in Gotham. So it puts itself in a very interesting place in Batman's life, where he still has to go and fight angry Italian people, but also he still has to go and fight, freaks that are coming about too. It really is the dawn of the freaks, which is really excellent to go and see them go and battle each other between Italian people pretty much and freaks left and right. But each issue of this actually came out over time, month by month, highlighting a particular holiday. So the entire time while you're reading this, you're trying to go and deduce exactly who is the holiday killer.
Was it just called Holiday? Just flat Holiday? Or was he called...
Nah, he's the holiday killer, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Continue.
But anyways, you have to go and deduce who the holiday killer is. They throw a lot of different red herrings in there. There's so many different people you think it could be. And it's thoroughly one of the most enjoying comics that I've run from start to finish. In trade paperback form, absolutely wonderful. Not to mention the artwork in here is extremely non-comic booky. That's not the word I want. But it is not...
Unconventional.
Unconventional. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's not exactly like your most conventional looking book. It's not like a Jim Lee. Jim Lee is known for being highly polished, just highly, dynamic and stuff. But there are so much detail in this book with just the coloring and using of like the 90s style Batman with the super long ears and, all the different shading and absolutely solid color tones and things like that. I think that The Long Halloween is probably one of the finest books that can possibly exist for the Caped Crusader.
I definitely agree, Dan. Yeah. Can you go ahead? No, I don't have a thought.
And not to harp on the point that I brought up with Hush, but another Jeff Loeb book, another mystery. The cool thing about Long Halloween, from where I sit, is that you actually don't end up finding out necessarily who committed all the murders. There's someone suggested, but there are quite a few potential candidates, and depending on who you ask, some people believe that the outcome of the story is different, so it's open for interpretation. Once again, it's on the reader to do detective work.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful that it is so much on the reader. It leaves a lot to the imagination. There's so many points in time where I stopped reading the book just to go and talk to someone who has read the book and to go, hey, I wonder if it's this character. Could it be Two-Face? Could it be Falcone? I don't know. But I keep on questioning myself, which makes it, one of the most interesting books to really look at, just because you are thinking about it the entire time. It makes you think. And as Mark just said, detective stories really are where the Dark Knight shines. You can go and watch him whip the shit out of somebody all day long, and it's still a blast, enjoyable. But when he really puts his noggin to use, the Caped Crusader is at his best.
Good word.
Yeah. I like it, Dan. No, man, I'm like 10 years old. I love seeing him punch people. But, I definitely agree with you, Dan. I know how you feel with like wanting people to agree, and I know you come at me saying like you should read The Long Halloween.
You better read this book.
And like it never dawned on me because
how the fuck you did read Dark Victory but not read The Long Halloween?
Yeah, I was so out of touch. I'm like, oh, this is a follow up to Year One. This is awesome. And I'm like, oh wait, there's a book before this book that everyone talks about. But yeah.
I'll kill you, Brenda.
I mean, go ahead. You have something
I think it's also to note that both these books, obviously written by the same guy, it's not just Batman being the detective. You're not just like watching Sherlock Holmes or somebody be like, oh, elementary. This is how it is. They throw in the hints to the reader also. So not only is Batman being the detective, but so are you. So you are not only following the story, but you're kind of like, the Watson or something just trying to figure it out also, and that also like
Figured Watson.
it pulls the reader into the world more so
Yeah.
by having them also come up to their own detective like solutions.
It's one of the better successes of Jim Moore's writing.
Right.
Very
And
inviting.
then when Batman reviews it, and if you were wrong or you were right, it doesn't matter. It's just like, yes, you know, you are the greatest detective in this world.
By the way, guys, his arch villain in this whole comic is called Calendar Man. You definitely want to read this book, strictly for Calendar Man. He's the coolest Batman villain ever.
Wonderfully conceived.
Yeah.
Trust me.
This is why I read Dark Victory.
Let me tell you, calendars are my enemy. I never have any of them around, and I never know what day it is.
Goddamn those grid lines. Villainous. Villainous grid lines. Alright. I think on that note, we're moving on. Mark, please share with us.
Yes, Mark, please render your opinion upon us about your favorite of the Camp Crusader stories.
Well, I had a really hard time picking a favorite story, but I had a really easy time picking a favorite writer. Grant Morrison is pretty much my favorite writer in comics. I'm a complete fanboy, and in my mind, he's done the best Batman comics of the past 30 years. The more you hear me on this podcast, the more you'll realize I'm pretty much just trying to get you to buy Grant Morrison's comics so that he can have all of your money.
We don't shameless plug authors here.
Yeah.
We equally, unbiasedly recommend all of them, except for Mark.
So, as the Grant Morrison Batman story I picked to talk about was actually his first one. Batman Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. It was a graphic novel from 1989, during which Joker and the Black Mask stage a break-in of Arkham Asylum and take control of the asylum. The inmates are literally running the asylum. Batman has to go through one torturous night inside the asylum, evading all of his foes, and facing mental anguish residing from the dark history of the place where all his foes come from. So, there are a couple of reasons why I picked this. Firstly, in the 80s when it was written, there was this whole movement to make Batman darker and more realistic. You saw it in The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One, both by Frank Miller, and you saw it in Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore.
Yay!
And Morrison really kind of rebelled against that, which I thought was cool. It's so dark, it's very dark, but it's also super surrealistic. One of the on-running themes of the book is madness, and I think that's important because a lot of people will tell you Batman is crazy. Frank Miller's Batman comes off crazy. Cool thing about this book, and the art is by Dave McKean, and he has one of the most surrealistic, unconventional art styles you will ever see, and it really highlights the on-running insanity throughout the book. It literally takes place in an asylum. What redeems it for me is that this was Morrison's way of saying Batman isn't crazy. He puts him through the darkest mental spots in a hell of his own mind, and Batman comes through the other side. After this, all of Grant Morrison's Batman stories are featuring Batman as a kind of Zen warrior who's really unstoppable and prepared for every eventuality. But I think that
Sorry, Mark.
sorry, I got distracted for a second. But I think that the cool thing about this is that it kind of proves Batman's sanity, that he survives this, and I think that's an important counterpoint to the dialogue that's kind of been running about Batman since the 80s. That dark and unrealistic tone, I feel like, was very in keeping with the Batman movie that was out at the time, Tim Burton's Batman, and I think it's really appealing, especially when compared to the kind of gritty, drab world presented by Miller. The other thing that I really like about it is that it really focuses on Batman's villains by being set in the Asylum with so many of them there. Honestly, I think Batman's villains are more interesting than he is.
Yeah, most would agree.
Yeah. They have a certain amount more flair, but why they're cool is that they reflect him in certain ways. Two-Face represents the duality in Batman and Bruce Wayne. Killer Croc represents the animalistic totem nature of what Batman is. His fighting Killer Croc is very reminiscent of St. George fighting the dragon, and it's a wonderfully symbolic moment. Maxie Zeus represents his iconic mythological status among the both in world and in our popular culture, and on and on and on. Each of the villains that he faces in this, Scarecrow as the arbiter of fear that Batman inspires in his own foes. All of the villains in some way comment on a certain aspect of Batman himself and on his baser instincts. But the fact that he faces each of these basic instincts and comes through the other side is why I think it's ultimately a proof of his sanity. One thing I also really liked is the long-running Morrisonian symbolism. Morrison has written a lot of Batman in the past 30 years, from this to Batman Gothic. The long run on JLA, in which Batman was a member, his long run on Batman, Batman and Robin, Batman Incorporated. I could go on. He's written a lot of Batman, and the cool thing is a lot of the same motifs that were featured in Arkham Asylum in the 80s remained constant right through Incorporated in the 20-teens, like for example, the use of the centipede as a motif representing insanity, or the use of the beetle. I think it's very. I think that it really shows a lot of foresight that he was able to plant these seeds that pay off later. I also like the way that it also kind of gives you the haunted Gotham feel. I think it was probably the first one to really do that, to my knowledge. Of going back into the pre-20th century history of Gotham and finding out about the haunting, creepy stuff that happened there and why the whole city is kind of haunted. And a lot of other work by other writers, and Grant Morrison, but particularly Dark Knight, Dark City by Peter Milligan, have really done well by focusing on this kind of supernatural evil that seems to have persisted in Gotham throughout its history. So all of that wraps up into kind of making Morrison's first Batman story one of, in my opinion, the best Batman stories. And I think I just rambled on for quite a while about Grant Morrison and Batman.
That was a healthy amount of Grant Morrison and Batman.
I think you did bring up a really good point towards the end. Well, everyone, saying, as we have already had, that the villains really are quite an interesting focal point, but not so much like the city. And the city itself is very much alive, and like the stories have been written about Batman recently very much show that. And so by creating a more dynamic Gotham, every character is actually more so something more than what they were before, by just reimagining this area and making it something even more than just a normal city.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Chang. The villains always have been a focal point, but it's the also I haven't really gotten to explore too much. I've only read chunks of the Court of Owls, so I only know partial about like how like the Wayne family and other old families from like pre-19th century kind of like had heavy hand in this sort of secret organization and it's kind of become somewhat of basic bat knowledge about like how the Crane family's legacy kind of goes way back with Arkham and all that jazz. But yeah, that sort of lore into why, like, how deep the sickness has seeped into Gotham is something that's really interesting, because like it gives even his setting that sort of strong ambiance of corruption and like darkness and a sickness that he's combating beyond just the typical scum that are on the street. So
and it's perfect naming too. I mean, Gotham literally means in Middle English home of the goats. And since you have the satanic goat heads, there's kind of this undercurrent of satanic imagery. Or with Arkham Asylum, Arkham is a name that Denny O'Neil, the Batman writer from the 70s, pulled from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythology. So I think that really there's kind of this dark undercurrent, and the way things like Arkham is its own character in a way. Arkham is this place of madness, and it really reflects upon itself and the people who are inside it, whether it be Batman visiting or the Joker curating the place almost, or the others who are trapped in there. I also really like the way it actually represents the villains as crazy people. There's a scene in there where they've taken away Two-Face, the doctors have taken away Two-Face's dice, and they've instead given him a deck of cards. So now rather than having everything as binary, either do this or this, he now has to figure out 52 options. He ends up not being able to use the bathroom. And I think that by portraying them not as just criminals, but as actual crazy people, it both humanizes them and adds a level of fear to the reader. I could go on about this all day.
I know, personally, that's one of my favorite things about the whole comic is, as soon as they go and they throw them into this place, it's almost like Arkham it's built as an institution to go and house these crazy people and to go and help these crazy people in the end. But Arkham has such a doom in its name and such a dread of what this place actually represents and who the people are there that it ends up fucking them up more. Ergo, that Two-Face from earlier not being able to go and make a choice for himself because they try to go and take the duality out of him, trying to go and seize whatever kind of personality he has to him to go and just make him a blank slate. That's one of the most enjoyable things about that fucking book. Everyone who is in there is way more fucked up than when they got in.
Yeah, that's everyone. The inmates, the doctors. The only one that comes out stronger is Batman himself.
Yeah. I think that really solidifies your point. Yeah, I really see that now. I mean, I didn't read Arkham Asylum, but I can definitely...
You should totally check it out.
Yeah, I'm definitely vibing with your feel of, now I can see, with such, isolated psychiatric, feelings that are, displayed from each character, and Batman's, so easily, manipulated as, this character who's psychotic, and very justifiably so, but still... he also kind of upholds the opposite of the spectrum, where he kind of maintains his sanity above all in these extreme conditions. So yeah, I can definitely see that as a really interesting highlighting point. So,
it's a very influential book because moving forward, the type of Batman that you see after the events of Arkham Asylum is very much a stronger character than the one beforehand. The Batman that you see fight the devil and fight the White Martians off by himself, that's the Batman that comes out of Arkham Asylum.
Alright. I think it's a good point to get going to our anchor man, final story. Chang, what do you got for us?
Alright, well, I guess moving along quite a bit, I decided to do Requiem, 2014 run. Not really one particular story. It's more of just each one of the comic books that are currently out. Each writer wrote their own part to this Requiem. So notable names are John Layman, Scott Snyder, Grant Morrison, of course. And it follows the storyline, or supposedly at that point the final storyline of Damian Wayne, the son of Batman. And what really got me with this story was I knew a lot of the backstory, having not actually read them myself, but having quite a number of individuals, you guys included, having read these stories and informing me about the darkness that is in Bruce Wayne and how Bruce Wayne is actually kind of his mask and how the real face is Batman. And this one is really was quite nice to read because it was, of course, for those who may not have heard, spoiler alert, but Robin dies, Damian Wayne, and it was really done quite nicely because the way you get the feeling is it really wasn't, Robin dying for Batman. It was Damian Wayne dying for Bruce Wayne. And in of itself, this brings Bruce Wayne back to maybe the darker side of him. It kind of crushed the Zen part of him.
That's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Right. It really just set him back to who he was beforehand, kind of on the verge of going absolutely insane. Alright, I didn't want to say the pun, but I can't resist. Batshit insane.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, that was a good one.
Just can't resist it, man. But moving along, what it really represented to me was it showed me that what Batman is doing is definitely for the better, because it showed every supporting character from Batgirl, Nightwing, and they all just come, the entire Bat family, even Alfred. They all go.
Even. It's always especially.
Well, it's always especially Alfred. Can't knock out that guy. But it just, everyone comes back. Even Wonder Woman, people in the Justice League go, and they really bring him back. If it wasn't for, it shows the anchor that he is. Not just, this crime-fighting, kind of crazy individual, but just shows that he really did create something more than what he originally was, and created a icon.
I think it's really cool that that I picked the first Grant Morrison Batman story and you picked the last Grant Morrison Batman story. It really brings it kind of full circle. Like you were saying, it's really great how it reflects on the supporting cast. Particularly, I think Dick Grayson, who was the mentor to Damian the same way Bruce was a mentor to him. I think that was a really cool reflection that you see in that story. I never thought about the idea that it kind of brings... that Grant Morrison essentially put the toys back into the chest. He brought the character back to where he was kind of when he left him. That's a really cool point. The death of Robin is what leads into Arkham Asylum, and it's what ends Requiem. That's a really strong symbolism that I never noticed. My mind is blown.
Mark is like, oh my god, it's a full circle.
Yeah, whoa.
Just like everything from Morrison.
Yeah.
It was 30 years later. How'd he do it? 20. I'm bad at math.
Coincidence.
But yeah, I'm sorry. I just had to jump in there with that because you blew my mind.
Yeah, when you said the Zen, that triggered the thought in my head too. I'm like, yeah, that was probably the more standout piece for me reading that when I had it off you, and my memory's vague, but yeah, that remembering that Robin is the ballast for Batman's society, even more so because it was his son, his son being who his son was, raised by the League of Shadows, being this chaotic force, only amplified the stability that was established by a Robin partnership in Batman. It really kind of solidified, because he's one of the most interesting parts about Batman in general, at least for me, is that dichotomy that he is practically an anti-hero when it comes down to it. I mean, you take away some of his rules and he'd basically be one of the worst villains out there in any comics ever. So just seeing that taken away and him almost reeled back to that villain level is interesting, but the cynical, kind of unfeeling, unsensitive part of me was very annoyed at the grieving process. I was kind of very pissed off that he was like DC's crybaby for a little while, because everyone had to come shelter him, and he didn't have it in him. And then of course, losing a child is an absolutely morbid experience, but you just kind of experience. I expect more from Batman. I expect him.
You expect too much. You can't keep it all together, man.
Yeah.
It's a tough fucking world out there.
It's a tough Gotham. That's all I hear every time I watch Gotham. all they ever say is Gotham, the city will treat you that way, Gotham. You live your whole life in Gotham. You steal burgers from my joint, Gotham. Blame everything on Gotham.
That's another thing you actually bring up with this Robin, Damian Wayne, was actually, despite being his son, the most on the verge of being a cold-blooded killer, being raised by the League of Shadows, and it showed that also Batman can save people because Robin was on such a close verge of being another villain of Batman.
Did he save him?
Well, Grant
did
Morrison.
die.
Grant Morrison. Oh,
Internally, Dan.
Internally. Okay,
He
Grant Morrison
sacrificed himself for the city.
he did.
Gotham. Look what this city does.
Grant Morrison himself said he saves the world. He did his job as Robin. He dies an absolute hero.
And now
So-
he's brought back as a martyr.
Oh, don't get me started on that. Oh no. I don't want to get in on that. That's another podcast.
Completely trashing all of his personal things.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I personally like this Damian Wayne, just this whole story arc in generally, just because you do see him hold his own against a lot of the rogues gallery. It's you see him beat the shit out of the Joker with a lead pipe, which is a far cry from
Crowbar. It was
crowbar. That's even
full circle
worse.
again.
Yeah,
Because that's what the Joker used on Jason Todd.
family.
yeah. But, you go and you see him hold his own, which is absolutely wonderful. This cold and dickish nature that Damian Wayne has, and Bruce is the one that has to go and kind of change him and try to go and mold him into this respectable individual to go and carry out the code of the Bat.
Yeah. Honorable mention, by the way, Dark Mirror. I really like the Dick Grayson Batman, Damian Wayne dichotomy, which is the opposite, where Damian is the serious one, Batman is the chill one. And that's a pretty cool storyline.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the period where Dick Grayson was Batman. I really strongly considered doing that run on Batman and Robin as my...
that was considering that too, yeah. That and, Heart of Darkness. Never read Heart of Darkness?
I don't know that one.
Oh my god, Mark. Mark hasn't read something. I want to put a gold sticker on my back now. Boosh. How's that for a full circle? Alright. So it seems we've come to a halt. So, I'd like to ask you gentlemen, as we move to our next portion, our final portion of our podcast. Moving forward, I couldn't say that in a right mind that we're not living in probably the best time to be a Bat fan. I mean, there's just so much Bat culture out there. There's comics, over 20 publications, video games, movies, several movies, TV shows, it's everywhere. Batman's everywhere. In any shape or form, he's just this global entity. And going forward, how do you feel about Bat culture today? How do you feel about it going forward? Do you feel any hopes, expectations, worries? How do you feel about, the future of the Batman? Does it look bright? Do you think he can continue to endure the test of time, or do you think it's just going to blow out eventually? It's just going to saturate to the point and he's going to diminish and fall into nothing?
I personally think that Batman is going to always continue strong. At this point, he's a piece of Americana, He's a piece of our culture and a piece of our history, and something so ingrained into us is never going to leave us. He's the digesting point of all of these various kinds of stories that comes out. At this point, he's on the verge, if not already, being great American literature, along with being a comic book as well. It's something that can go and please old fans and something that can go and please young fans. The Bat isn't going anywhere, and especially because they have so many different products out there, for literally every age group, so many other things that you can go into. It's just like
Bat toothpaste.
Yeah, Bat toothpaste. I have a fucking bottle of that, or I used to a long time ago. No, not gross.
Just waiting for that Bat credit card.
That credit card.
Like in Batman and Robin?
Yeah. Let's talk about the Bat credit card.
I think that already exists in some shape or form.
See, there's even a Bat line of credit. He's fucking everywhere.
Bat.
But I think he's always going to stick around, personally.
Okay. Chang, You had a point.
Well, of course, I believe Batman will stick around forever. And it's mainly due to the writers. The writers really brought him into a new age, and they'll continue to do so. As long as those great creative minds out there, you know, any comic book character can exist. You just have to remember, Batman came from, you know, like Adam West kind of style, very cartoonist, just a guy dressed up as a Batman. There wasn't really too much behind it.
Don't hate on Adam West.
Oh, I'm not hating on Adam West. That was great.
Yeah.
You know, the time was just perfect for it. But, you know, we didn't have this kind of tormented, you know, kind of dark hero that we do today. And it's very much due to the great writers that have come up with these stories that not only are creating his future, but his past. So I suppose even with the new Gotham TV show, you know, elaborating his past and creating this past that's more defined can really create a good cornerstone for future stories to come and just evolve Batman into something that, as of right now, I can't even see.
It ending anytime soon?
What?
You can't see it ending anytime soon.
Oh, it's not. No,
Okay, it's never gonna end in your opinion. I definitely sympathize with you, Chang. Yeah. Actually, you go ahead, Mark. No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see Batman going anywhere. The Batman comics might not be around forever. I think they might be reaching a slight oversaturation point since they're carrying so much of the load for DC right now. But generally, like you're saying, he's on TV, he's in movies. Really, he hasn't gone anywhere since the days of Adam West. He's always been DC's biggest hitter, with the possible exception of Superman, since the 60s, and I don't think that's likely to change. I think there are so many different interpretations over the years. There's just something very basic and primal that registers with us about Batman. At the end of the day, in a certain way, he's the American dream. He's this kind of self-made man. If Superman's the ultimate American immigrant experience, then Batman would be the ultimate kind of American dream, born and raised kind of self-made man thing, and I think that really resonates with people.
That's beautiful, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, my God.
I think that Batman has become such a cultural juggernaut that it won't disappear within our lifetimes. I mean, you know, one day it'll probably go the way of all things, but, you know, who knows? It could be the next Odysseus, and people will be reading about it in 3,000 years.
Oh my God.
Discussing whether or not it was true or not.
And then someone will find this podcast
That-
amongst the rubble.
That is some insane
We're-
thinking, though.
Digging across fossilized New York City when we found these slab inscriptions of a reading list of all the Batman books we should be reading. Narrated to us by the podcast myths of our time, including Brando, Dan, Mark, and Chang. Yes, read these books, they say.
There must have been some tribal historians or chieftains of some sort.
Yes.
Quickly, Brando,
This
sing to me the first Batman theme song you can think of.
Oh, yeah.
No.
No. The only one I can think of.
See, Adam West is still there in the background.
Oh, he's always there.
Oh.
Hans Zimmer and who's the other guy? Danny Elfman.
Yeah.
They haven't supplanted the theme song yet.
I definitely agree with all of you. All of you on every point. Dan, you saying that it's just so integrated into culture and it feels like it's so rooted that it can't disappear. And definitely what you're saying, Mark, I didn't really think of it out that in that light. But yeah, I suppose he does really symbolize a self-made man. I guess we kind of reject that ideal a little bit since he had a few more benefits than the average male.
Well, and that's the thing. That if you think about Batman too hard, you come.
Money is power.
But with the loose metaphorical view, yes, he is a self-made man, and I mean, it definitely takes the will of iron to do what he does, and definitely with Yusei Chang, and mostly with Yusei Chang. I feel like the most enduring part about Batman is as long as there is authors willing to tell intricate and thoughtful stories, great stories about Batman, then that will be his lifeblood. moving forward into the future. And then as long as there's great stories, someone will be there to listen to them.
That is a good point you brought up, though. Like he's a millionaire using
His,
millions of dollars of military grade weapons technology to beat up purse snatchers and the mentally ill. Like there's something a little screwy about that. While dressed in a leather bondage suit. All right.
Yeah. That's why we love him.
But I'm still saying he's sane.
If you had a good time, you can comment down below. Let us know what you thought. Also, the links for all the books we talked about will be below in the information section and the description. If you want to check out any of them, please do. Let us know what you thought about them. And before we head off, we're going to give us this week's recommendations. So, I don't know if we're going to be doing the Batman voices, but I'm feeling like we should. I recommend. Since it's the 75th anniversary, I can't keep it up. Of Batman, I would suggest you guys read Year One. Since we didn't get to talk about it tonight, definitely check out Year One by Frank Miller, inked and penned. Actually, not sure if inked, but definitely drawn by Dave Mazzucchelli. The classic, quintessential origin story for the Dark Knight, regarded heavily as the definitive version. It's a wonderful story. It's got all the brooding tones. It has a wonderful introductory story for the Dark Knight when his beginning time. Coming into to Gotham and just beginning with just fish wire and pins and whatnot, and just really becoming the Cape Crusader. And I just feel like you should all check it out. It's not really a single issue. I'm pretty sure you can find it at any Barnes & Noble's, comic book store, website, anywhere. So definitely check that out. Damn, what do you got for us this week?
This week, Brando,
Oh shit!
I'm telling you, you need to read Fables.
You sound
I
like
already said Fables. Fables is, wow, this is really difficult.
you're less of a
You just sound like a really old man.
You sound like
You sound like you've got like the
Macho Man Randy Savage.
You're
Oh yeah!
I'm the Tower of Power.
You're a 12-pack a day smoker. You smoke a carton a day. That's what it sounds
I'm
like.
Frank Miller, Batman, guys, leave me alone!
That's Frank Miller? I don't know. Frank Miller is like almost normal Batman. It's like
Whatever.
Anyways, my suggestion to you guys is to go and read Fables by Bill Willingham and all drawn by Mark Buckingham most of the time. It's ending in a few months. It's ending, I think, in February or March, but that doesn't stop from the fact that Fables is, if you're enjoying Once Upon a Time right now, or you just like Fables like the Big Bad Wolf and Snow White and Rose Red in general, you should... What?
Cinderella? She got one right?
Yeah. Okay.
My bad. Keep going.
Yeah. But anyways, basically the story is about all of the Fables live together in one collective world called Fableland, and somebody named the Adversary comes and drives them all out because he's killing all the Fables. They all move into New York together and create their own little area called Fabletown, where they go and they police themselves and have their own government, and much chaos ensues. Starring your favorite Big B Wolf, otherwise known as the Big Bad Wolf, King Cole, Bluebeard, and many, many others. It's an awesome book, and it's ending, which means it's finite, and you should go and get everything.
Thank you, Dan. And Mark, what have you got for this week?
I'm counting on it. No,
Everyone's-
I'm
Christian Bale, we're all going to be sore after this.
yeah. I'm gonna stick with the theme here since I talked about Grant Morrison ad nauseum today. I'm gonna recommend his new book. I believe it's from. I'm sorry, I don't know the publisher, but his new book Annihilator with a Fraser Irving on art. It's a really crazy story about a writer who moves into a haunted house with this kind of endless deep hole in the backyard, kind of a Mel's hole for the old late Coast to Coast with Art Bell fans. situation going on in his backyard, and at the same time there's a story about this intergalactic criminal who's been sentenced to spend the rest of his life on a space station orbiting a black hole until he dies. And it's where their stories meet, and it's really dark and awesome, and I can tell it's going great places. So try and get a copy of that if you can. Only one issue's out so far, so jump on.
I don't read. Grant Morrison. It's overrated. Chang.
Alright.
What is the last recommendation for this week?
I'm gonna keep with the theme and actually also go with a Grant Morrison.
Fuck.
I recommend Batman Incorporated number 13. It is the final issue, the Batman Incorporated saga, and it's going to end another run of Grant Morrison's comic books, so I would recommend picking this up and the other Batman Incorporated to really get an idea of how Grant Morrison is writing currently, and it's good stories.
Yeah, Team Grant Morrison.
You guys.
All right, guys, that wraps it up for this week's Paper Cuts podcast. You guys have a good day and a good life.